Did you know that if you don't follow Airbnb's health and safety regulations, you could be at risk of having your reservations canceled and your guest is entitled to a full refund? Airbnb's health and safety guidelines outline how to handle positive coronavirus test results and cases of suspected exposure, as well as how to handle entering your Airbnb during a guest stay. In this week's video, I'll go over how to stay compliant with the guideline and also give you some critical details about hosting guests who have or potentially have COVID. So stay tuned until the very end. Welcome to another episode of Airbnb Uncovered. I'm Matt, the creator of AirbnbUncovered.com and Airbnb Superhost. On this channel, I uncover some of the best kept hosting secrets, as well as share with you everything that I've learned after hosting over 3,000 guests. My tips, tricks, and best practices are all focused on helping new hosts earn more revenue, attract the best guests, and achieve Superhost status faster. So if you're new to hosting on Airbnb, this is the right channel for you. The pandemic is firmly upon us, with global case counts continuing to rise daily. Airbnb has established a set of health and safety guidelines to keep hosts and guests alike safe and healthy during the COVID-19 outbreak. So what's in the health and safety guidelines? Well, it's pretty simple and straightforward. If you have had a confirmed diagnosis of COVID-19 within the last 30 days or currently have COVID, you cannot interact with your guests in person or enter your listing during a guest stay. The same goes if you think you may have COVID and are awaiting test results, or you are showing signs of COVID, or you think you may have it, or you've been in contact with someone who has a confirmed or suspected case of COVID-19 in the past 14 days. The only exception to this rule is that if you're hosting frontline healthcare workers under the Frontline Stays program. And all of these same rules apply to anybody who works for you. These same guidelines apply equally to guests. If they think they've had or think they have COVID-19 or have been in close contact with someone who has or thinks they have COVID-19, then you can cancel their reservation and the guest is not eligible for a refund. If you violate these guidelines, your guest is entitled to a full refund. Repeated violations of this policy could see your listing removed and you banned from Airbnb permanently. And these are some pretty serious consequences that can definitely have an impact on your bottom line. Question: I'm curious, have you hosted anyone who has tested positive for the coronavirus? Either you hosted them by accident or because you thought it was safe. How did it go? Tell me about it in the comments below. To ensure that you're not hosting a high-risk guest, Airbnb is recommending that you ask all potential guests about their exposure level before accepting a reservation. They have provided some standard questions for you to include in your messaging to guests. I'll run through them now, but I'll also put them in the description below so that you can copy-paste them. So here they are. In the interest of health and safety of all my guests, I'm asking everyone to answer the following questions before they book. In the last 2 weeks, have you or anyone you live with traveled to any areas that have been impacted by COVID-19? Have you been diagnosed with or suspect that you have contracted COVID-19? Do you currently have any travel restrictions in your area due to COVID-19? And that's it for the questions. If you have instant booking on, you can add these questions to your pre-booking message. If you host a shared accommodations, there's a few other guidelines and tips for you inside the health and safety guidelines, but these aren't subject to the same harsh no refund or no payout stipulations for having or suspecting having COVID-19 that I just outlined. These guidelines include that you should always be maintaining social distancing of at least 6 feet when interacting with a guest. They want you to provide soap and or hand sanitizer and frequently wash your hands for at least 20 seconds or completely cover your hands with hand sanitizer and rubbing it until dry as frequently as needed. You should also limit the number of people in shared spaces inside your home and always wear a mask when interacting with your guests inside. You could also consider limiting access to shared spaces in your home to keep some areas totally guest-free. Be sure to ventilate commonly used spaces as coronavirus can hang in the air, and clean and sanitize common areas, particularly the bathrooms and the kitchens, often. So you might be wondering, if you have a self-check-in process and you have no need to enter your listing during a guest stay, could you host a guest who is looking for accommodation while they quarantine or self-isolate because they've tested positive for the coronavirus or have been instructed to do so from a local public health official because they've had an exposure to someone who is infected? And the answer to this is no. Airbnb is not supporting reservations of this kind. And look, I agree with this. Even if you host in a self-contained home, the guest still has to travel to your home, potentially infecting others along the way. Then, while the infected guest is in your home, they're going to be infecting your home with COVID-19. While the commonly accepted guideline is that COVID can live for up to 3 days on surfaces, I'd still be worried, even if I didn't enter my home for 3 days after a guest checks out. And regardless, if I had a guest who tested positive in my home, I'd want to do a hospital-grade disinfection, and that would take a lot of time and it would likely be very expensive. I don't feel that I'm equipped to do a hospital-grade disinfection with my current knowledge and skill. And trust me, my current knowledge and skill about disinfecting and cleaning is very high after doing months and months of researching on preventing the spread of infection in indoor spaces. Another question you may have could be, what if a guest is traveling to be close to a family member or close friend who is currently infected with the coronavirus? And according to Airbnb, this type of reservation is fine, as long as the guest has not and does not plan to have any close contact with the infected person. One final thing to keep in mind, though, is that if a guest receives a positive test result for COVID-19, they can cancel penalty-free. They simply have to provide the proof to Airbnb, and then they'll get a full refund. While this is the right policy to have in place during times like these, it can still affect your bottom line. Maintaining a healthy bottom line while hosting during the pandemic has been something that I've been obsessed with since the declaration of the global pandemic back in March. I knew that I wanted to stay open, well, because I 100% depend on my revenues from Airbnb to live. Plus it was, and it still is, permitted in my local area. I've spent countless hours researching the latest guidance from the CDC, the WHO, Health Canada, Airbnb, and various hotel associations on how to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. That research has led to a system of cleaning and sanitizing that doesn't take all day and keeps me and my guests as safe as possible. In addition, I've been experimenting with different marketing tactics to see which ones yield the greatest returns. And to be honest, I'm seeing some great earnings as a result. I'll be sharing all of this with you in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned. Continuing to host and earn a decent return during the pandemic is entirely possible. It's really about keeping yourself and your guests safe and following the necessary guidelines and protocols, like the health and safety guidelines we just discussed. In a nutshell, that guideline basically says if you have COVID or you think you have it, or you've had it recently, you cannot be in contact with your guests. And conversely, guests can't book or stay in an accommodation if they have or think they have or recently had COVID-19. The result for violating this guideline is losing out on your payout, and if you repeatedly violate these rules, you risk being delisted and banned from Airbnb altogether. As always, I hope that you learned something that you can immediately put into practice in your Airbnb hosting business. If you did, then please give this video a thumbs up and rate it highly if you're asked. If you're not already subscribed, but want more tips, tricks, and best practices for new hosts, then do it now, and don't forget to click on the notification bell. Until next week, bye for now.